All right, so here's a few news articles that are interesting. Trump, you may remember this, he tweeted recently, he's been tweeting a lot of crazy things, and he tweeted that everything to do with the Russia investigation should be immediately released with no redactions. And Trump has claimed before that his statements on Twitter count as presidential authoritative orders. And if that is true, then a judge could say that means I'm going to release the complete Mueller report, which is certainly not what Trump meant. What he meant, of course, was the investigation that the Republicans have launched to try to prove that the Russia thing was fake. Anyway, a judge has said he needs to get an official word from Trump by Tuesday, or he's going to release the Mueller report with no redactions, based on Trump's tweet. And so this will force Trump to do what he almost never wants to do, which is to actually make a clear statement about something. That you can't just tweet things and then claim that sometimes I mean it and sometimes I don't. You have to make clear what orders are. So we will see what comes of that. But one possible answer is we might get the Mueller report out there without redactions, which will be sort of interesting, although realistically, I highly doubt it's going to come out in time to change the results of the election. But we'll see. So here's another one. Someone's been leaking more information about the Cambridge Analytica rigging of the last election. More information showing that something new about this. I saw it was pretty interesting, but I've forgotten the details. But anyway, she's got more information about the another Cambridge Analytica whistleblower, which shows the details of how they used Facebook and used it to send voter suppression data, which helped to rig the last election. And so here's another guy, like the ones in Michigan. There's a person in Wichita, Kansas, who is also planning to kill the mayor to punish them for having COVID-19 mask mandates. This is quite popular, and Trump has encouraged it over and over in many ways. So this is part of the rebellion he wants to start, which many people are very concerned about, will continue even if we do get rid of Trump. We'll now have a really disgruntled bunch of Americans who hate everything about the government and feel like there should be an armed rebellion against it as Trump's legacy. And so here's Rudy Giuliani. This is an amazing article. Well, people wonder what happened to Rudy Giuliani, who used to be a respected and important figure. And what people say is he's just a drunk. He's completely drunk all the time. But anyway, he went and got more Russia disinformation, dumped it as supposedly the October surprise. And they found that both Giuliani and Trump were totally warned that they were getting lies from Russian intelligence. And Trump said, I don't care. Who cares? Anything that helps me get reelected is fine, which is, so, you know, if Trump were to win again, there's all the pieces here for another impeachment, just like the last one again, with better evidence this time. And so now people are doing, I hadn't heard of this before, hackers are DDoSing people and they are impersonating the Russian military, which is fancy there. It's one of the many Russian military groups. So they are sending threats to people saying, we're going to take you down and we're the Russian military, you can't stop us. And then they do DDoS people, and so people are paying pretty big. Somebody paid like $200,000 and such. It's a pretty good idea, I suppose. All right. And so QAnon is really getting a lot of promotion from Trump. He promoted him again at the last town hall a couple days ago, saying, you know, they're wonderful people, or say they're against pedophilia, and he doesn't really know if there's anything wrong with them. So they show that the enormous number of Republicans believe this stuff, like 38% believe it. And here's an interesting chart. This is part of what's incredible in America. You know, 21% believe that QAnon is very accurate, number 17 somewhat accurate among Republicans. There's just a huge difference between Democrats and Republicans. And, you know, for once, the names of the parties are very clear. I've been hearing a lot about this, hearing a lot of political analysts. The Republicans, if you say anything about how it's not democratic, many Republicans will now reply, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. The point of a republic is only a privileged few get to rule and vote, and the other people are not allowed to vote. And America was an actual democracy from 1965 to 2013, but not outside that time period, since the Supreme Court decisions to basically take the teeth away from the Voting Rights Act. We have been back to our older condition where a large amount of suppression prevent poor people and black people and a bunch of other people that Republicans don't like from voting. And so we're ruled by a minority who are the privileged people who are allowed to vote, and other people are just, you know, lesser citizens. And Republicans have a point. That's what America was for most of its history. There's a group of us called Democrats who believe we should be a democracy, but Republicans do not believe that. They believe we should be ruled by basically a master race. And that's not the majority anymore, but they're powerful enough, and there's enough support for that in our structure for them to have minority rule like they have now. Anyway, this one's pretty interesting. They're going to, Microsoft, but after the Christian hippie gets on SCOTUS, yeah, oh yeah, will get so conservative. Well, yes. I mean, that's a good question. After this woman gets on the Supreme Court and there's a 6-3 extremely conservative majority, and then they do crazy things, I think there will be, what'll happen is it will push the liberal left more. And if they move over towards like Bernie and AOC, then they will do things like, one of the best proposals I've heard is to put term limits on Supreme Court. I would really like to see that. All my life, I've seen this stuff where sick old people dying of cancer or trying to cling on to the court longer and longer to avoid something terrible happening. And, I guess it's because I'm getting sort of old and sick myself. I feel like that's just terrible. Like old monarchies where you'd have sick, dying people on the throne that can't step down. I think a term limit on the Supreme Court would be a good idea. So there's just a churn of people coming in. Another good proposal I've heard is they should just add 2 justices for every president. That's it. And then let the total number vary. But there shouldn't be this nonsense where if she gets on, we're stuck with 40 years of extreme right-wing rule when that's not what the majority of the people want. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, Microsoft, if you install Windows 10, I just got a new computer and set up Windows 10, and it forces you to have a Outlook.com account, and it tries to convince you to share your stuff with the cloud. They have a Microsoft equivalent of iCloud, and that will share things like your login across devices. And now they're going to make your clipboard go to the cloud. So you can copy from your Windows 10 and paste it onto your Android onto another Windows 10. So I'm sure there will be some security consequences, but anyway, it sounds pretty useful. SonicWall has remote code execution vulnerability on these devices. 800,000 of them are vulnerable. And one thing about these, at least the ones I've used, they don't automatically update. So I bet most people haven't updated in years and probably won't update. But anyway, it's, and apparently it's trivial. A very simple code execution vulnerability. Azure. I'm using Azure quite a lot. As a student asked me right at the beginning of class, I found out how to get free Windows machines on Azure for students. So that's a good thing. And now Azure has Azure Defender for IoT. And this apparently will also be free in a public preview. So this is basically a cloud-based firewall to protect your Internet of Things devices and inventory them. I've met some people who are paying like $200 or $300 for a home security gateway for their Internet of Things devices. This is a pretty good idea, to have some kind of cloud service that controls and filters the traffic going to your vulnerable IoT devices. So this would be a good thing to see how it works. And I see it's integrated with Splunk and so on right from the start. Yeah, sure, Anthony, I can help you later. Set up the Windows 10. Its expertise with Office and other Microsoft, well, I would imagine, yes. Certainly Azure is a very marketable skill. And I would imagine that Office 365 is too, the same way that the earlier offices were good for like office work. I would think so. Although I'm not an expert, who would know would be Steve Nelson at the college that gets to help students find jobs. But I would think so, yes. That's how I started. Office was the main skill I had when I started working at a financial company years ago. Anyway, I think that's enough. I'll just move down to the official stuff, which is someplace around here. Let's see. Oh, it's in this window. There we are. So we're here to chapter 4, and this is the first of several lectures about chapter 4. I haven't even written them all yet, but I've written the first 3, so we got enough to go on with. The first 2 quizzes are up, and the 3rd quiz will be up like within the next couple of days. And we'll get the rest of the semester. We'll probably be doing more and more of chapter 4. It's very big. Anyway, this is information security program development. So there's a lot of topics in here about the programs. And all right, we'll start with this stuff. So you have, when you make an information security program, these are the considerations. You have to decide what your outcomes you want. There's a written document called a charter. There's a scope. And then there are frameworks. In particular, information architectures, or security architectures we're going to talk about are the Open Group Architecture Framework and the Zachman Framework. So there's 4 steps. You make a strategy, you have some goal you're trying to accomplish, then you do gap analysis, figuring out the difference between what you have and what you want. Then you make a roadmap and a security program to get there. So this is just a collection of activities to identify, communicate, and address risks. So you have controls, processes, and practices. The thing you're going to hear all the time over and over again here is try to address one of the huge problems, which is that security can't just be a negative thing that makes business hard and makes it fail and says no all the time and makes everybody hate them. That's the way it's been. And modern security programs are supposed to knock that off. You're supposed to realize the point of the business is to do business and succeed. And if the security program gets in the way of that, it's not helping the business. So you have to help the business accomplish their goals. And this is like lawyers. Lawyers really help you advise you. You say, look, I need to do this. How do I avoid getting in legal trouble when I do this? How can I adjust it so I don't end up, getting sued for what I'm about to do? And it's the same thing with your security company. Look, we want to move to the cloud. We want to make an app on mobile phones. We want to do something to make our business easier for our customers to use. So I want my security team to help us figure out how to do that so it's not as risky as doing it just the stupid way. And they say it's like the brakes on a race car. Not that you just hold everything back all the time, but you help them strategically slow down when necessary. So if you do it right, you'll have better alignment with your strategy and deliver more value and avoid wasting resources. That's the plan here. If you do it correct, then you help the business succeed. So strategic alignment is making sure that your program works together with the rest of the company. What you want is your security team should be on a trust relationship with the other teams in the company so they can call you. So I remember years ago when I started teaching college, I had a lot of students that would miss classes and then they would come in late. And I had just finished being a tech, basically a server administrator on the job, and I missed half of my night classes because there's a problem at work. So I said, I don't want to be one of those teachers that yells at people for showing up late. In fact, I want to make sure that they feel welcome even when they show up late. So back then it was all face-to-face. Anyway, I had various tricks. I said, I want to make sure that if they show up an hour late, I'm nice to them and I'm welcoming to them. I don't tell them you should have been here earlier and yell at them. And you have to be that way. If people call you up and say, we want to, do this new thing, you don't yell at them, you rotten bum, that's not secure. You say, well, let me help you do that. You have to be helpful and friendly with the stakeholders so they trust you enough to talk to you before they do things. Otherwise, they're going to just not ask you and do something awful. So risk management identifies risks and figures out what the right treatments are. And then you have value delivery so that the business activity can happen without exposing the company to too much risk. So you've got resources, you have staff and tools. And if you do this right, then you right-size the budget so you can handle the work and you don't have the wrong amount of staff allocated incorrectly, wasting money. And so here's performance activity. You measure how well things are working, and you measure how secure things are. One thing that we talked about in the incident response class, one of the best measures is speed of response. That's easy to measure and it means something. So how quickly do you detect a security problem? How quickly can you fix it? That is a number that's pretty clearly a measure of the quality of your program. Anyway, so you want to integrate your security with the other parts of the business, all these different parts of it, HR and legal and so on. So you influence them in a productive way to help steer them away from harmful activities and into safer ways of doing things. The charter is your written document that explains what you're doing, timelines, funding, personnel, and so on. And this is your sort of internal document to give you authority inside the company to do these things. So you have a security manager who develops the security policy, risk management, and security governance, and then controls. So you end up with, they implement these things, you do vulnerability management, you evaluate third-party risk, which we're going to talk a lot about in the third lecture, and these other issues like business continuity planning, which are how you respond to disasters. Like, for example, this pandemic. A lot of companies have just gone broke forever, but ones who can plan correctly and plan for some range of disruption like this. So it is a team sport. You can't just be a security person that feels like you're high and mighty and smarter than everybody and more powerful than everybody, and you will just issue edicts. That's the old way it was that totally did not work. What you must do is influence people with a good relationship with them so you can help guide them through. The fact is, the security people do not own the company. They don't get to make decisions. That's the CEO and the board of directors. So you are just a servant of them. That's why one of the huge problems my students have, they go out in the field and become consultants. They go to a company and they're doing everything wrong. And they say, they got to quit doing this, but I can't make them quit. I said, that's right. You can't. It's their network. You're just like an advisor. A doctor can come to you and say, you know, you got to stop smoking. It's going to kill you, but you can't make you stop smoking. You say, no, I want to smoke. He said, well, I'm just an advisor. I give you advice. And if you decide to ignore it, it's your life, you know, so you have to be aware of the limits of your power, but you have some influence if you're able to gain influence by negotiating with people and by impressing them with that you really do know what you're saying. So you have to define the scope of your security program, which might be a certain location or a certain part of the business. And there are frameworks to guide you. So here are the three most popular frameworks are the one we talked about a lot: ISO 27000, COBIT, and NIST are other ones. This is the big one, internationally respected everywhere, very expensive to implement, with a very long title, and it has all the processes to assess risk and make controls and perform things like vulnerability and incident management. COBIT is the one from ISACA, which is designed to show you how to run an IT organization. And the National Institute of Standards made the cybersecurity framework in 2014, again, to try to just be a standard you can use to try to prevent breaches. And so they give you some guidance in forming security policies. So we got 4A1, all right, looks good. All right. All right. Yes. Well, maybe that's it. Aha, all right. Any more coming? Might be one more, I suppose. Looks like it's not happening, okay? All right, establishing trust. That is strategic alignment, is the fancy word for that, okay? All right, effectively using staff. Okay, that's resource management, good. All right, the formal written document. Okay, that's the charter, good. And what framework was developed by ISACA? COBIT, there you go, good. All right, so Okay, good. I see NIST told me who he is. All right, good. So, all right. So let's get down to here. And all right, so you got a roadmap. These are the steps that will achieve your objective. So you've got plans to reduce the risk. And all right, your enterprise architecture is both technical and a business function. These are listing the business functions that have to be performed, and there's a model showing how it maps onto IT. So the information security architecture is a subset within it. We will specify on the security components. All right, so I missed my letter there. All right, so here's the point of an enterprise architecture, and this, of course, is what happened. Businesses, there used to be no computers like in the 50s and 60s, and then businesses moved to this highly tech-focused world we're in now, where everybody uses computers for everything, even when their business is like a bakery and has no obvious connection to technology at all. So it became necessary to take business planning and add it into the fact that everybody's using technology these days. So you have to figure out what to do. So make sure you're actually getting hardware and software that serves a purpose at the business, and organize it so that it efficiently does your business without wasting a lot of money and time doing pointless things that don't accomplish your business goals. So you got two layers to this. You have policy and standards. Your policies are decisions you make about how to do things like centralized authentication, endpoint-based web filtering. These are decisions you make that we're going to do things this way to achieve our security goals. And then you have standards which specify exact vendors and which products to use, and therefore much more detailed. And of course, you'll often change the standards as you move from one vendor to another, and even if you're still following the same policy, which is a larger scale overall goal. So one important issue is to have centralized functions. This is why Microsoft Windows is so important. Windows has this thing called the domain controller, Windows Server, and if you're a big company, you have to have one. If you don't have a domain controller, then all the security settings are made on each device one by one, and as you have multiple locations and employees get hired and fired and promoted and move around, you no longer have every machine configured correctly. You have to have one central point of administration where you decide what version of software you're running, who all the approved users are, who the people are no longer approved are, and everything else. So a centralized location to control security things is necessary. And so that's the game. Another thing it does, of course, is it means that the one administrator controlling the central device can control all your locations at once. And for almost every large company, this is done with Windows and domain controllers. There are Casper servers that do it for Macs, and there are other ways to do it with things like Linux to some extent. But the number one successful way to do this is Microsoft Active Directory. This is what almost every large company uses. And so it uses lightweight directory access protocol to send information about identities across the network, and it's called Active Directory. It's the main central server. So if you try to print something to a printer, even if the printer is sitting right next to you, it sends the signal up to the domain controller and asks it, is this guy allowed to use that printer? Where is that printer? And if you are allowed to do it, then it sends the signal back and says, okay, you can print that. And every time you log in, it has to send your signal all the way back to the domain controller, although you can have copies of the domain controller locally to make it faster. And that's turns out to be the best way to get things done. And then you have centralized monitoring, like Splunk, which we're using heavily in the other courses. So instead of having logs and alerts of all your little devices everywhere, they're all sent over the network to a central server where you can look at it in one panel and see what's going on your network. And then you have device management, things like security settings for your servers and routers and firewalls all in one place, so you can push out the changes and interrogate the devices to see how they're doing. It turns out everything needs to be centralized if you're going to be successful at protecting a company, and really even at keeping the machines up and running so business can succeed. So there are some frameworks for this. TOGAF is one of them, and Zachman is the other. And these are not focused just on security, they're architecture. So they've been around ever since people decided how to computerize businesses. So this is a life cycle architecture framework. So you have a way to plan out the design of your IT services and to maintain it. And so you have, you make a vision, you lay out your architecture, you set up your information systems and its technology architecture, and then you figure out what you can do with it. And you have a change management board, so you can determine when it's appropriate to change it, and you have requirements management where you change the requirements. This is a huge big deal. Every time you build anything in IT, within a few months, they want something more, or they want something different. So it's not enough to just build it once and say it's done. You have to plan how you're going to constantly increase it and improve it and replace it with the next version and add the new features. So you constantly have to decide what new requirements do we need and how are we going to deal with that. So you've got a preliminary setup to get going, and then you have this requirements management in the center where you say, well, what do we really need to do, say this quarter or this year? And then you go around, do all these things to make it happen, and then you decide, well, then we need to do this and that as the world changes around you and you change the requirements of your network. The Zachman Framework is the main one, and this makes your IT network look like the maintenance for the physical building. So you've got different levels here and different parts of it here, and it's just a way to list all the things that have to be done to make sure you take care of them. So you've got business logistics here, and a workflow, and a master schedule. You've got a list of events, just many, many pieces of your company have to be taken care of here. And when I first saw these lists, I just thought they were baffling and confusing, but I'm slowly getting used to them. This is what you really have to do. Running a modern company is really pretty complicated. It's not like there's 3 or 4 things you have to know. There's really a whole grid of things you have to take care of. You have to make sure that all these things are being dealt with by different parts of your company. So anyway, you got a security architecture. You got policy and governance and the major decisions up here, like the brands and devices. And at a detail level, you've got specific configuration files to push out to the desktops and the firewalls and such. And if you decide to improve your DNS infrastructure, you might have more DNS server addresses, so you'll have to push those updates to all your devices if you do it that way. Of course, another way to do it would be to just implement a load balancer, so all the devices continue to think they're talking to just one server, but in fact going to a group of them. But it depends on your situation, which one of those is better. These days, almost everybody's doing software-defined networking. I was talking about this with a student at the start of class, where you actually put physical computers in a room and wire them up with physical wires. That's a pretty small part of the business now. Pretty much everything is in the cloud, in virtual machines, and all the network devices are virtual too. So you want to get used to running the Google Cloud Firewall and the Amazon and Azure networks. And so that's software-defined networking. Everything's virtualized. And these days, people are going serverless, where you have small services and they run in containers. And containers are little packages that include all the software necessary to do something, but they're portable from machine to machine. They're like virtual machines, but they're much smaller and much faster. All right, so then you got program management. So this is what we're going to talk about, activities and results, and the rest of this stuff will come later. All right, so governance is the activities that find your risks and treat the risks. And then they determine the roles and responsibilities of the people. And then, as always, there's a closed loop. You measure it to see how successful it is so you can run a loop and go back and continuously improve it. So at the top of everything at your company is the board of directors. They determine everything. They appoint the CEO. They decide the global direction of your company. And in particular, they determine things like risk appetite. How are we a agile, fast-moving company like Facebook that wants to do the new exciting thing right away, and we're willing to accept some amount of chaos and error and security problems because we got to be the first on the latest new thing? Or are we somebody conservative like a bank, where we really don't need new features? Our most important thing is that everything doesn't change and everything stays reliable. So that's your risk appetite. Then you got a steering committee, your security officer here, the audit, your information officer, and then management and employees. All these people are involved. So the steering committee sets your roles and responsibilities and your overall strategy. And as we've been saying, you cannot have a security strategy that doesn't match your business strategy. You've got to make sure that you're integrated with the real goals of the business, or you will not succeed. You have to be helping the business do what it's there for, not trying to drag it off course or hold it back. All right, your Chief Information Security Officer, like the one that came and talked to us a week or so ago. They develop the policy, conduct risk assessments, and then they can oversee the processes. Vulnerability management determines what the vulnerable parts of your network are. Incident managers responds to things like virus infections and breaches. Identity and access management is huge. This is what keeps track of who everybody is when they're connected to your network and make sure what they're allowed to do. Then you have to train your staff, and you have to make sure that you meet your compliance rules to comply with whatever standards you must comply with or whatever government regulations you have to match. And so a big issue here is auditing. Another related, this class is about getting the CISM certification, but another closely related one is CISA, where you become the auditor. An auditor is the person who comes in to make sure that you are in fact meeting all the requirements on a long list of requirements. So it's, they analyze these things. They have independent presence in the company. They test to make sure if things are being done correctly. So you make sure that all the stuff that should be encrypted is encrypted, only the right people have access to things, the doors are being locked properly, the personnel are having their background checks, you know, many, many things are on your list of requirements, and the auditor comes through to make sure all those things are being done correctly. So the Chief Information Officer is here just to make sure that the IT system works correctly, including all the pieces. And then there's management. Each management is responsible for some people, and you're responsible for the conduct of your employees. So if your employees are breaking security policy, doing rotten things, then the manager is expected to control them, limit them, discipline them, train them, fire them, and replace them, do whatever's necessary to make sure that they don't keep doing bad things. And all employees, of course, have to comply with the basic policy. There's a certain policy document you have to agree to just to work at a company, and there's typically annual training and brush-up training on basic security policies that you are required to adhere to. And if you violate them by leaking out company secrets or installing unauthorized software on devices or things like that, then you get punished in accordance with whatever the policies are. So you got to have governance. If you don't have good governance, then people just start doing uncontrolled random things on the network, and you end up with breaches because people are not being controlled and guided into doing the right thing. So here's the goal. You have risk, you totally improve your processes, you actually respond to security problems and achieve your compliance to a greater degree. Compliance, by the way, is never perfect. One of the things that is pretty discouraging is the US military. The military defined about 10 years ago standards for security, and they've been doing audits and publishing them, and every year they're like 95% out of compliance. And you could get mad about that, but that's where it is. They were able to define the standards, but they weren't able to, the government in particular, non-military parts of the government, doesn't have enough money to achieve the compliance. So that's some degree of progress where you now know how bad it is, but we're nowhere near actually meeting proper security standards in our government process. So anyway, you have business continuity and disaster recovery, like I was saying, to hopefully survive interruptions in business caused by disasters like the one we're living through now, and you measure the effectiveness of your policy. These are the activities that go on, and if you do it right, then your company should be more likely to survive a disaster, waste less money, you know, have less security breaches, and so on. Unfortunately, nobody is able to quantify how much money you will save by implementing a security plan. It'd be nice to say if you adhere to ISO 27001, then you will have less breaches and save money, but it's not that simple. The fact is, it's crime. There are enemies that come and attack you, and you know, how do you know how effective your police are? How do you know how effective your military are? It's just a qualitative measure. You'd like to say they are stopping some attacks, but you don't really know how many attacks they're stopping. You just go on sort of a intuitive grasp of whether you're improving things or not. So anyway, If it works right, then you get a good reputation. People trust your company. Your employees believe that they're safe enough to do their job. Your customers feel okay to give you your data. So there's companies like Apple, very widely respected. People don't feel like they're exploiting you. They don't feel like they're spying on you. They're happy to carry this iPhone everywhere and have it listen to everything you do. And there are other companies that aren't that good. Like Facebook's getting a really bad reputation from what they did in the last election. Many people are really mad at Facebook, saying they take all this data and then they do awful things with it that you wouldn't agree to. So, this is what happens if you control security. Hopefully you get a good reputation and people can trust you. Anyway, take a look at the cahoots. 4A2 is here. Nice. We might have one more. All right, I guess we got 4. All right. All right. So which one? We'll name a specific vendor. Okay, those are standards. All right. Okay, which enterprise framework was developed in the 80s? That's Zachman. Good. All right. Which one uses multiple independent containers? Those are microservices, they call them. All right. And who are the personnel that verify that systems are working correctly? Those are the auditors. Good. Okay. So, all right. So Dallas, Ants is, yep, I remember who Ants is. And IT, okay, good. All right, I see who IT is. All right, so let me close this and I'll stop recording.